Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hiker Sessions, where we interview long distance hikers, day hikers, and everyone in between. Today, I'm very excited to welcome to the show Dana Thurston, or Stryder, as he became known on the trail. Welcome to the show, Stryder.
Hey, Sloggy, how you doing? Thanks for
Um,
having me on.
oh, thank you. I'm doing great. Stryder joined the Maine Appalachian Trail Club in 1988 as a volunteer. Then he decided to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail in 1991. After he got back, he stayed with the Maine AT Club volunteering, and he maintained the West Cary Pond section of the Appalachian Trail as a volunteer for the Maine AT Club for 20 years straight, and is still an active member of the Maine AT Club to this day. I think the first question I have for you, and I'm curious about this, and I would always talk to people I met on my thru hike last year. What what in your background led you to standing on Springer Mountain about to embark on over 2,000-mile journey? What in your background drew you to that point?
A few things. It was a combination. I remember learning about the AT when I was a little boy, but it was just there in the background, and you're growing through life, and sometimes life hits a few speed bumps, and you know, job transition. I went from working construction to working in an office. So being physical every day to all of a sudden being in a cubicle every day, and relationships. I hadn't found my special partner yet. And it just seemed like I was just making the same mistakes over and over. And then I met people that were hikers. And I met a good friend of mine who had done the AT back in the 70s and was still an avid hiker. And so I was hiking with him and I heard all his stories. And I kind of thought in the back of my mind, if I ever got to a point in my life where I needed to hit the reset button, maybe the trail would be a good thing. And so that was always in the back of my mind. So, with the job change, with the relationships not working in my life, it was indeed time to hit that reset button. I made the decision right around Christmas, and 3.5 months later, I was on the trail.
Wow. So you'd had, it sounds like, some ample hiking experience. You had your buddy who had done it, so you'd heard his stories. What expectations did you have for the trail based on what you'd heard about it before you stepped foot? And then what did it end up being?
Expectations on the trail. I wanted solitude. I was hoping for some head time to just think and process things. Um, it was interesting because in the first portion, I'd say the first third, maybe first half, there wasn't a lot of solitude. I mean, everybody's on the trail. You're dictated by Mother Nature and the seasons. So everybody starts in the spring, and the trail was crowded and shelters were crowded. I wound up tenting probably half the time just to have a little, solo space. Um, so that expectation of achieving solitude kind of didn't play out until probably the second half of the trail. Other expectations, I really wanted to do something big, something that I could put my own personal stamp on, and say, wow, because I was one of those guys that just worked the job, paid my bills, and went about life. And I just wanted to do something that would make me feel, I don't know, worthy. Not that I didn't feel unworthy, but I wanted to just do something big, have some quiet solo time. Um, and then, aside from my expectations, I did. It was weird. This one little thing. Um, I I expected to finish. I knew really well that only about 15% of those leaving Springer reach Katahdin in one year. And I knew I was in good shape. I was 36 years old. I knew how to, I had all my gear. Wasn't like I had to learn how to backpack. Um, so I was feeling pretty confident. And I knew that the only thing that could take me off the trail would be injury or illness or going broke, which happened. But yeah. And then along the way, the expectations I had changed. And there was just so many people I met, so many scenarios, good and bad, bad weather, bad moods, great weather, great people, great weather. It was more fun and it was harder than I thought.
Hmm.
Does that kind of summarize it?
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. You mentioned about you went out there looking for solitude, and I think a lot of us that hike the Appalachian Trail or start it figure that we're probably going to be by ourselves. But you also mentioned the people. Were you surprised at even though you went out looking for solitude, at the relationships that you were able to make out there?
Um, Surprised in a sense that I knew I'd meet a lot of people from around the country and maybe even from around the world. And I was kind of looking forward to that. I just didn't expect the sheer numbers of people, and many of which I'm still friends with today. You send the typical Christmas card to folks, and people move, and over time you lose connection. But there's still a dozen, 2 dozen people that I stay in touch with from that year in '91. So I made some great friends, a couple of which I'm still in touch with today. One of the guys that I met on top of Chioa Bald at sunrise turned out to be from Greater Portland here in Maine. We have stayed in touch. He went into real estate and he's been my realtor for 3 or 4 transactions. So we're still friends.
Wow, that's amazing. I think that really speaks to that shared bond of that huge goal that everybody has out there. No, that's really cool. Did you ever contemplate maybe doing another long hike if you had the opportunity, or was that kind of you did it and you were good?
Anybody who does a long hike wants to do another one. I mean, I've thought about going southbound this another time. Then I've thought, well, let's go northbound. But the numbers of people on the trail nowadays is just multiplied so many times over since I did it 34 years ago. I might do some kind of a flip flop, but then there's so many other wonderful trails out there. I'd love to do the Benton Mackay, maybe the PCT. I don't know if I could handle that at my age, but yes, there was always that thought of another long distance hike in my mind.
Yeah. What I mean, this question just came up. It popped in my head. You mentioned something about one of the little surprises maybe on the AT was it you always had the confidence that you were going to make it, but it was a little harder than you thought. Which was it the physical part of it, or was it mental being out there that long? What did you find the hard part that surprised you on it?
Um, yeah, the down days, the days that you're just in a funk, whether it's a beautiful sunny day or whether it's a rainy day. And I got through that by just telling myself, hey, if I was at home sitting at the office, I can have good days, I can have bad days. I'm not at the office. So if I have a bad day, it's really not that bad. Um,
That's perfectly said.
yeah, yeah, but I had to get off the trail near Harper's Ferry, coming through Devil's Racecourse in Northern Virginia there. My legs just started to hurt, especially the left one. And back when I was running in school, running cross country and long distance races, I had shin splints. And, I took care of them as best as I could at the time, and they went away. But the constant pounding for 900 miles on the trail, it flared up again, and I was miserable. I actually got off the trail, went into a little town in West Virginia near Harper's Ferry, think Charleston, I think. Um, and went to the hospital, and and uh, and they checked me out, did some X-rays, determined what was going on. The guy said, "Look, this is just going to take time to heal. There's no quick heal, and you could probably just go home, let it heal, come back next year, and finish the rest of the trail." Well, I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to quit. So I just hung out for a couple of weeks, volunteered at the AT Center there in Harper's Ferry, tootled around, hitchhiked down to Luray Caverns. I'd never been in underground caverns before. So I just took it easy for a couple of weeks, let it heal. Went back to the doctor. He gave me a brace, and I wore that. And I just did small miles for the next week or so and built back up. And my leg was never a problem again. But that was a really low point there. And so that was hard. But I figured once I'd conquered that, I probably had a good chance, knock on wood.
You definitely had more confidence than I did when I started out for sure. It's just there's so many variables out there that can take you off the trail. I will assume that prior to finishing your AT hike, you had been to the summit of Katahdin before, I'm sure.
Oh, several times. I've done
Yeah.
every trail in Katahdin.
So how much different was it touching that sign at the end of a through hike compared with just going up like with your buddy for a day hike?
How much different? 100%.
Yeah, what'd it feel like? What'd that feel
it,
like?
it was like I was hiking with two other through hikers, and we all kind of naturally spread ourselves out so we could each have a moment at the sign by ourselves. And it was just surreal. It was just surreal that I'm telling the other two as we go across the table line, that's the summit. That's it. That's our goal. And I just bolted, and I get up there and touch the sign, and it was a Saturday, and there was some weekenders there, and it was just surreal that it was done. I did it. I heard about a person climbing Katahdin. She'd come all the way from Springer. She fell and broke her leg on the hunt trail, just 2 miles from the top. And I'm thinking all the way up, don't trip, don't trip. And it's like, so I got there, and I keep using the word surreal, but it really was. You touch that sign, you realize you've accomplished it, and there's no more white blazes, and you're just on a high. But you're also like, it's done. It's such a paradox, but it's a high. You feel super good about yourself, and getting emotional here.
Yeah,
It's been
I
34
get it.
years,
I
and
get
I
it.
still get emotional.
Yeah.
Um, I kept a journal all the way. And to this day, I still have not been able to write in that final journal that final day. I just couldn't seem to put it into words. Everything up until that last day, I couldn't seem to put it into words. And there's a blank space in that last journal. It's hard to put into words.
Yeah. You think you'll ever fill in anything there or just keep it up here and in here?
I might, someday, sitting by the lake, sitting on a mountainside, sitting in a nursing home. I don't know. I might put those final thoughts down, but yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
So one of the things I was really excited about it, rather than just because I could talk through hiking all day, especially with someone who's done it, because it's that kind of shared bond. Even though we didn't do it together, we both stepped all those steps on the trail.
Yep.
You did it in 91. I did it in 2024. The differences I know have been, we talked a little bit offline and we did a little thing for the Maine AT Club a couple weekends ago. The differences are stark. Now, you mentioned the amount of people that you saw when you went 34 years ago. I would imagine if you had seen the people around me on my second night at Gooch Gap Shelter, it probably would have been triple the amount of people that you saw. So I'd love to get into maybe some of the differences. We'll go shortly through some of them. So as far as like what you talked, you had said you had all your gear and everything, so the big four things, which I always consider like, your tent, your backpack, your sleep system, and your cook system. So what did you take for those for kind of your big four pieces of gear?
Um, I had all of those, but whenever I've given clinics or talks, I always start with footwear
Okay.
because I tell people you can have the warmest sleeping bag, the lightest pack, the best performing stove, but if your feet aren't happy, you're going nowhere. It's like spending $100,000 on a beautiful car and have crappy tires. You know, so I always talk about good footwear. Treat your feet right, and they will treat you right. I had leather boots, Goodyear welt to them. Although I did use about 4 or 5 different pair of footwear, I was always conscious about good footwear. But as far as the other things, um, you mentioned sleep system. I tried to go really lightweight with my sleeping pad, and it was just a half-inch foam ridge rest. And that wasn't anywhere near enough to be comfortable. Along the way, I found a piece of foam in one of the hostels, excuse me, and somebody had left it behind. It was open cell foam, but I rolled it together and it worked for a while. So I used that for a while. My sleeping bag was a 20-degree synthetic fill. Wicked heavy by today's standards. It was probably over 5 pounds, probably weighed as much as my tent, you know. And but I was thinking about down, but I was thinking, it could get wet, and I didn't want to go that route. So I, uh, decided to just carry the extra weight, and that's probably why I tried to skimp on the pad. Um, the tent, I used a Sierra Design flashlight clip, not freestanding, but as you probably know, I got to the point where I could set that up in 90 seconds. It was just, especially when it's raining, you move a
Yeah.
little faster. And, yeah, it was less than 5 pounds, and I still have it. I haven't used it in years, but I still have it.
Yeah.
And the pack was a low Contour 3 internal frame. In the late 80s and early 90s, the shift in pack technology had gone from the external frame packs to internal frame packs. And I found it to be much more comfortable. It was closer to your body, didn't sway as much. You might even see it here in the right back here.
Yeah, I see it.
Um, and it worked great. It was very comfortable. A pack is like your boots. It needs to fit well, and one pack is great for one person, but probably not another. Um, and what was the other piece you mentioned? The
I'm
other,
curious about like your kind of the peripherals, like your cook system, and I'm really curious what that contraption is over your left shoulder there, the
ah,
Nalgene looking water bottle thing.
yep. Believe it or not, camelbacks haven't been around forever. So when I was on the trail, I had an external pocket on my pack, and I got tired of stopping, taking off the pack to have a drink of water. So I went into town, I got a sports bottle, and I got a hose at the hardware store. I threw away that kinky, straw in the sports bottle and put this in there and put this in my pack. And even though it didn't have a bite valve, I would just blow back after drinking each time. I would blow back a little bit, and it had a vent in the top of this here, so it didn't collapse on itself. So it was early days of a Camelback.
Too bad you hadn't invented that.
Yeah, I've been saying that to myself for years.
You did invent it before you knew it. What your pack? Do you remember what your pack weighed, kind of roughly, when you hit Springer?
Too much. Uh, yeah, I was old school. I had like sneakers instead of sandals as my camp shoes. I had a heavy sleeping bag. I had a wool sweater. Fleece had just started to become popular, and I loved this. The Norwegian LL Bean sweater. I had that. Used it all the time. I took that, twice as heavy as it could have been. But when I hit Springer, Boy, and I was prepared for cold weather because, the Southern Appalachians can be cold in the spring. Um, a lot of people from up here in the north forget that. They think the South is beautiful and warm all the time. It's not. So my pack was probably pushing 60 pounds.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
never hear that today.
No, mine was 31 pounds,
Yep.
I think, when I
Yep.
hit. Yeah, 60 pounds. That's a lot. What about like trail conditions, the blazing? Was it, did you find it easy to follow the trail? What about those types things?
Yeah. I think, yeah, it was pretty straightforward. It was blazed well, maintained well. I never felt like I was lost. Although I have to admit, a couple of times I did take a wrong turn just because I was cooking that day. You get into a groove and you're just moving along. And I remember like New Jersey, New York, somewhere, and I just blew by a turn. And all of a sudden, I'm in a cow pasture and there's no white blazes. It's like, oh, okay, backtrack. And another time I was up here in Maine and I just went off to the left, a little side trail to a view. And it was beautiful view. I think it was near the Carl Newhall shelter, I think. And I sat there, had a little snack and enjoyed it. And came back the side trail, hit the AT, turned south. About a half a mile later, I see a blowdown. I'm thinking, oh, that looks familiar.
It's it's
I
it's
turned
not
around,
it's
didn't know
not
what to
hard to
get.
do. It isn't
But
hard to do when you get out there. That's
yeah,
why I always caution people of, stepping too far off the trail to maybe use the bathroom or something in the Maine woods, because you don't have to walk too far into especially the dense Maine woods to find yourself getting lost a little bit.
but
Um,
overall, I think it was well marked and well maintained in the big picture. Yes.
yeah. What about some services like today? There's lots of shuttle drivers. There's even towns that offer, they'll come a little ways out of town at certain times of the day to pick you up and bring you in. And then there's a bunch of hostels in addition to motels and things like that. What about the services when you did it in 91?
Yeah, everything was there that I needed. I had a list of mail drops that I established ahead of time, boxes staged at home, already addressed and everything. So I was able to resupply in towns, and then I was able to resupply at little towns in between my mail drops, um, and the hostels. Um, oh, some of the ones that I remember would be the Jesuit hostel in Hot Springs, of course, the place in Damascus. Everybody stops at the place. Um, oh Lord, the monastery in New York, in the Hudson River Valley. Shaw's up in Monson. Uh, God, Shaw's was such good energy, because you're close, and the people at Shaw's were just wonderful. I mean, Keith and his wife, they just kept serving the food. We couldn't stop eating. It was great. So, um, yeah, the towns had most everything I needed. You
Yeah.
know,
You mentioned resupply. What did you, and it may be the same thing. What did you start out eating as kind of like your staple? And did you eat the same thing all the way through, or did you change it up as you went?
well, I knew enough, thanks to friends, to not make all your gorp at once and have the same gorp for 6 months. So I would mix that up, and change that up. I did get really tired of oatmeal. you know, in the cold mornings, you cook up your oatmeal. So come summer, I was only using my stove once a day in the evening, and I'd have a cold breakfast or something. So I mixed that up a little bit, the breakfasts. I went from things like regular bread to bagels because they carry better. Um, you know, uh, somebody said a joke one time. You can always tell a through hiker because their bread hangs off the back of their pack. No through hiker wants to take their bread and squish it inside their pack. Um, I ate a lot of mac and cheese, and I broke that up by bringing fresh vegetables from town. And so for the first couple of days, I would chop that up and add that to it. Fresh vegetables aren't going to last a whole week out there. Um, Dried fruits. I went from fresh fruits to dried fruits, changed that up. Like I say, a lot of mac and cheese, but then I started doing ramen and then the rice, the instant rice stuff, and try to diversify my food. There were days that you realized your diet wasn't right. You just didn't have the mojo that day. Your body was just like, nope, you can't do 320s in a row, Dana. Uh, because you're not fueling your body right, and you had to figure that out.
Was there any food that you had out there that you got sick of eating it so much and you kind of never ate it again or not for a long time?
The oatmeal.
The oatmeal, yeah.
Yeah, I got tired of it. Yeah. And when I got back home, it was not the first thing I reached for.
Yeah.
And that waned, you get that. But yeah, that would be the one thing I got really tired of.
Yeah. What about trail magic? Today it's I call them. There's maybe like professional trail people out there. You've got Fresh Grounds and Miss Janet, some pretty famous people out there lending a hand. Was that as big of a thing back then? People helping you out at all like that along the way?
Um, yes, not as much as today, which is okay with me because I always viewed the AT as a path in the wilderness. And it was always great. You come down into like my first experience, my second experience with trail magic. I think it was Deep Gap, and some folks who had hiked just the year before were there, and they had a shelter, and they had a cooler full of lemonade, iced tea, cold beer, fresh water. They had burgers and dogs on the grill. They had potato salad. They had grits. It was just like I had never heard of this before. It wasn't a big thing then, and I'm like, people do this, and it was pretty cool. It didn't happen a lot. Not as many shuttles back then. You just stick your thumb out on the side of the road and hope for the best. Um, and yeah, there were some shuttles, but you know, I think who was it? Damascus Dave, who owned the outfitter store in Damascus. He would do shuttles because people would always want to get there for trail days. So they'd shuttle ahead and then back to where they left off, or vice versa. If they were north of Damascus, they would shuttle back and then shuttle up there. So he ran shuttles. Um, but and it was, and then I gave back. When I was maintaining that section of trail up at West Cary Pond, I would always bring extra stuff. I would base myself at the West Cary Pond shelter, and I would bring some year fried chicken, but not fried chicken, a grilled chicken, or some years burgers and dogs. But I'd always bring fresh fruit and cold beer and iced tea and lemonade. And the hikers would come in, and it's probably been since Rangeley. So they've come over Saddleback, Sugarloaf, Crockers, Bigelow's, and they're in the middle of the wilderness, and they come to the shelter and they find trail magic. And, I'd always have fuel for the stoves, the white gas, and I'd have extra batteries for people, so I gave back. Um, but over time, it was like, I didn't make it a regular thing because I still wanted it to be magic. I wanted it to be a surprise for people, not something they would come to depend on, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It could end up getting
yeah.
themselves in trouble that way. I think I 100% agree with you. You do want it to be, because if you're expecting it, it just isn't as fun. But I'll tell you, I've done it a few times, and you do, and it sounds like you did. The people who do the trail magic, I think sometimes get as much or more enjoyment out of it as the people who are getting it. Because as a former thru hiker, you know what it means to the people who are receiving it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, you welcome somebody into the shelter, and I'm standing there with one hand behind my back and said, "Boy, today'd be a good day for cold beer, wouldn't it?" And they'd go, "Yeah, I wish." And I'd go, "Here you go." you know, and you're a hero. You're a hero for a night,
Yeah,
and you just swap the stories, and you hear their stories, you share your stories, and it's just awesome. It is. It makes you feel really good.
it does. What about communications back in 91? Now, I know there were no iPhones or any cell phones back then. What did communicating for yourself along the Appalachian Trail look like?
The trail registers, the registers in each shelter. Everybody ahead of you, you get to read. You know how far behind you are somebody else, um, and or how close you might be. Oh, maybe I can catch that person. Haven't seen him in a month. So the trail register was really important. It was like getting to the shelter and really reading the daily newspaper. And hearing other people's thoughts, and finding out, okay, how far ahead are they? Are they still on the trail or not? Um, Communication outside world, virtually none. You'd sit in the shelter at night and write a letter home to mom and dad or your friends, and then mail it in the next trail town. And then your friends and family would mail you a letter or a postcard, and it would be waiting when you got there, with a resupply or something. My mother would always send me, batteries or cookies or toilet paper, ramen, mac and cheese, whatever, you know. And then I would send home a letter, But communication, when I went back down to Springer on my 15th anniversary, cell phones were just coming into being. And people were calling ahead to reserve a motel room in the next town. I always thought that was cheating. I was like, no, you have to walk into town and make do to make a reservation ahead of time. That's cheating. but
Uh,
but yeah,
funny.
communication was old school.
That's funny. One thing I noticed a couple of times, I would get off the trail and walk down a road like into a town, and sometimes I could see very faintly old white blazes, and I've looked a little bit into the history of the trail. It sounds like at certain points on the trail, and I know like Monson, for one example, some of the trail used to go through more towns, and it seems as the years went by, they tried to move it further out of the trail, out of the towns. Is that something that you had noticed at the time or heard about later on?
Yeah, I think that was a goal of the ATC all along. Once the trail was established, you heard stories about the Cumberland Road Walk down in Pennsylvania, I think, and you heard horror stories of pounding pavement and in the open sun. And I think the ATC always had a goal of trying to get it off roads, out of towns, um, and into the mountains to further that wilderness experience. Certainly you had to go to town somewhere along the way to resupply. And Monson's a great example. You take the Shirley Blanchard road into Monson rather than following the trail, um, which I did. I went into Monson, but I was stubborn. I went back out that road, picked up the trail, and then 3 or 4 miles later came out to Route 15 up there. Some people would just hitchhike, from Monson up to the trail, and everybody does a little bit different. But yeah, as time went on, I find that more and more wilderness experience and less walking through towns.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like the more wilderness, although some of the towns where it still goes right through are pretty cool. But I mean, they're the big ones. You've got Damascus and Hot Springs. I tell you though, I'm not a big fan of the Duncannon Road Walk. That's a
Uh,
long. That's a you go through all the town and then across these bridges, and it was a hot day, so I would definitely want it more wilderness then. Uh,
yeah.
what about your like some memories that you have from the trail? And it might not even be a view, it might be just something you did with people. When you think about your time on the trail, what are some lasting things that just make you smile when you think about them?
Oh wow.
Could be a section of the trail or a town or just some people even.
Meeting my friend on top of Chiowa Bald, my friend Jeff Davis. He carried a guitar, a full-size guitar with him, and he would play around. He would play his guitar at campsites at night. And that morning at sunrise, he was playing the Grateful Dead as we were watching the sunrise. And his name was Jamming Jeff because he'd be jamming all along the trail. Um, and the night I got my trail name, I'd been hiking with the 6 Foot Hobbit and his wife, Even Star. And that was a memorable night because I wanted to. Some people would choose their trail name ahead of time because they had a character like I don't know, maybe they were a pilot, so they were Sky Pilot, or somebody else was Lonesome Dove or Lentil Ben. He ate lentils all the time, and but I wanted my trail name to reflect something that happened on the trail, have more of a tie to the trail. And so that was memorable. Birch Springs Shelter is the first shelter in the Smokies.
Yeah. So how'd you get your
Uh,
trail name?
uh,
How'd that happen?
well, it was a rainy night. And of course, you're climbing up into the Smokies, so it was cold that night. And we had just resupplied in Fontana Dam. And so Hobbit and Even Star and I were in one side of the shelter by the little fireplace there. And they were bound and determined to give me a trail name. It's like, okay, what do you got? Well, obviously, they were fans of the Lord of the Rings. And we're sitting around, and of course, what's the first name that comes up from Lord of the Rings? Stryder. And I'm like, yeah, there's a Stryder every year. It's like, maybe something more unique. Well, we went through every character in that trilogy. Oh, you want to be this? You want to be that? Well, maybe. I don't know if it fits or not. Well, after about 2 or 3 hours and a whole fifth of Jim Beam, I said, okay, I'll be Stryder. Good night.
Oh,
And
that's
then I
funny.
and then I and then and then I learned that there was another person on the trail through the grapevine or trail vine, as we call it, that had also taken the name Stryder. So I tweaked the spelling of it just to be a little bit different. And weeks later, I found out that he had changed his name completely to something different. But yeah, that was a memorable night in Birch Spring Shelter. Other things, of course, making the halfway point, getting your picture taken at the ATC Center. That was memorable. Um, God, lots of places along the way that I could speak to that, staying at Greylock and getting on
Yep.
top of Greylock and seeing that nice monument there to the World War veterans. And I volunteered at Bascom Lodge, the AMC Bascom Lodge there. And I volunteered there and stayed the night there for free. And that's where I had to get new boots. My boots had died yet again. And that was like on my second pair of boots. And I went into North Adams and got new boots. That was kind of memorable. Um, Crossing the line into Maine, that was huge. That was huge. The last state, I'm back in my home state. And then, of course, Katahdin.
Yeah. What advice would you give to anyone that's watching this or maybe hears the podcast who's, maybe they don't think they can do it or, something maybe holding them back? What a couple of tidbits of advice on hiking the Appalachian Trail would you give them?
Hike. Get out and hike. Um, After a winter of working 2 jobs myself, trying to save money and plan for this trip, I wasn't in the best shape. The trail gets you in shape if you let it. So I would suggest to somebody that's planning, get out and hike and carry more weight than you need on a typical day hike. Get used to what a heavy pack feels like. Get used to what your boots feel like. Um, just get used to those things ahead of time. Because when you get on the trail with a full pack, different area, different terrain, it's going to be like starting all over again. You're going to feel like you're starting all over again. And I go back to another piece of advice I always give people. I go back to the footwear. Make sure you've got comfortable footwear. And if you have the luxury, two pair of footwear. Break in a second pair ahead of time. And have them staged and ready to be mailed to you when you're going to need them, because you probably will. I only know one person that made it through the whole hike in one pair of boots, my year anyway. Take care of your feet, take care of your body, talk to people, talk to other hikers that have been there. Pare down your pack. And when you get to Neil's Gap, be prepared for the folks there to pare you down even further. No, you don't have to carry 5 pounds of gorp. Those would be the big things for me. The rest is so individual. Your food, your sleep systems, but learn how to use it before you go.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a lot of it. Just you end up figuring out on the trail, and you're right to point out. Between your feet and the mental game, a lot of the gear and stuff. In the end of the day, it doesn't. You don't want stuff that breaks, but it doesn't matter as much as kind of up here and down there. Well, look, I could talk to you all day about the Appalachian. Oh, very last thing.
Yeah.
Over your right shoulder there, you've showed me that T-shirt before.
Oh yeah.
And if you could grab that and just go through that real quick, I would love to have everybody see that.
All right, let's see if I can do this here. This is the AT answer shirt. Let me see if I can. That's a little better?
Yeah, I can see it. The official AT answer shirt. All right.
So when you're a thru hiker and you come into, let's say, the Shenandoahs, where there's a lot of tourists, and some don't know a thing about the Appalachian Trail, others have heard about it, but they've never met a thru hiker before, they ask you all the same questions. So this woman who had hiked, I think she hiked in 88 or 89, Lagunatic. Got to give her a shout out for this. She was from Laguna Beach, California, so she named herself Lagunatic. And she came up with all the answers, of the typical questions you're going to get from non-hikers, tourists, whatever you want to say. But you would, people would ask you all these questions, and it's kind of like Jeopardy. You've got the questions. It's like they're going to ask you, how many miles do you do each day? Well, 15 or 20 is pretty average. Or what's the next one here? Oh yeah, have you seen bears out there on the trail? Yeah, I've seen bears, sure. And what do you eat out there? I mean, you can't carry fresh food. It's like, well, you eat mac and cheese, And how much did your pack weigh? That's a typical one. How much did your pack weigh? Even between us thru hikers, we're always talking weight, know? And you'd say something like 50 pounds or so, which nowadays is probably more like 35 pounds or so.
Yep.
And they'd say, but where do you sleep at night? There's your answer right there, in a tent. You can say and shelter or whatever, or shelter. And how long does it take? Well, there you go, 4 to 6 months, and the last one there, and they'll ask you, well, how long is the Appalachian Trail? Well, it's over 2,000 miles, and then the last one, she just tacked in there, yes, I walked here, So that's a real fun one. I've kept it all these years, and it makes for a great conversation piece.
That's really cool. I could have used that when I remember a young guy and I we were hiking with. We stopped at the Knock, and a train had just come in, and tons of day hikers and tourists piled out, and we didn't mind because I like talking about the trail anyway. But I think every person that got off stopped and asked us at least one, two, or three of those questions. If I'd had that T-shirt, I could have just held it up,
Yeah.
draped it over me while I was sitting there resting, and it would have taken it. Well, Dana, again, thank you very much for joining. It was lovely talking to you, and I hope to see you at more MATC events, and I'm sure I will. And just thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on and allowing me to relive my experience and share it with others. And hopefully, I've offered a few tidbits that'll help an aspiring hiker, and they can get out there and have their own wonderful experience like you and I did.
Yep, I think you did. Thank you again so much.
All right, Sloggy, be well.
You as well. Bye bye.